Hello, welcome to Mapping Global China Conversations, a series of conversations hosted by the Mapping Global China project. The initiative combines data visualization and digital storytelling to track and better understand China's global footprint across a wide range of sectors. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Yixian Sun as a senior lecturer in international development at the University of Bath. His research focuses on transnational governance, environmental politics, and sustainable development, with a special emphasis on China's role in global sustainability efforts. And also Professor Yifei Li, Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies here at NYU Shanghai and Global Network Assistant Professor at NYU. His research concerns various groups of people under China's brand of state-led environmentalism. We are so pleased to have you here and to share your insights on China's global engagement, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the future of sustainable development. So to start off, you both study China's sustainability, environmental issues, but from, I think, different angles, right? Can you each briefly describe your main research focus, what you've been working on, what drew you to this field?
Thank you, Xiaojiao. It's my great pleasure to be here and also to visit NYU Shanghai for the first time. So my background is international relations. So as you can imagine, I always see myself as a global environmental politics researcher. And I'm very interested in the role of China in global environmental politics and governance. So naming how China shapes global institutions, but also participate or reshape institutions. But more specifically, I think over the last probably 10 years, I've been working a lot on the role of non-state actors from China in global environmental governance initiatives, especially looking at the case of voluntary sustainability standards through agriculture and food supply chains. And this is basically the work of my book, Certifying China, published in 2022, also reviewed by Yifei by the MIT Press. So basically, I'm interested in kind of the question of the politics in the process of developing these private transnational governance initiatives, and also what's the role of China in it. And more recently, as China becomes a global power, as we all know, China goes global through, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative, but also various other engagement. So I'm interested in how China is going to develop its own standards, global standards. Of course, it is an ongoing effort, and how this may shape global sustainability governance in different parts of the world.
Sounds fascinating. And
my work is a little different. He focuses on institutions, and I think that's a really important focus. I'm trained as a sociologist. I'm primarily interested in people, in China's overall system of environmental governance. That includes not only people like us, ordinary people who are affected by China's various interventions into the environment, not only domestically, but also internationally. People outside of China, when they're using environmental technology or environmental solutions, right, or policy models that attempt to replicate what China has done domestically. I'm interested in how these policies affect their lives. But not only that, I'm also interested in state officials. So a very substantial part of my dissertation actually looks at state officials. The kind of processes by which they make decisions, how they relate to environmental science and environmental scientists in general, and how they really understand the kind of work that they do and the values that they're contributing to the well-being of the state, the well-being of the people, etc. And again, it's very interesting that we're in this conversation together, because I am so interested in people, and my work really tries to engage with people and tell stories that are distinctly not about institutions. So when I reviewed his book, I'm like, yeah, I see everything about institutions, I love it, but there's no people in it. So I feel like we complement each other's work in a very ideal way.
And then combining both of your perspectives, we will have a more comprehensive understanding of China's global strategy, I think, and maybe impact because of people are involved in it. And then I was told by Yifei that Dr. Yixian Sun has recently acquired £1.7 million funding for your research. So could you explain a little bit what this new project is about and how it is related to the role of global China?
Thanks, Xiaojiao. And I mean, people keep asking me about my last grant.
Again.
Thank you.
It's so impressive.
Yeah, so it's actually a large grant, long-term research project funded by the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship. So I'm honored to be awarded by this grant. So the project is entitled Sustainability Governance of China's Global Infrastructure Investment, with the acronym SCAN. And in this project, we are interested in how China is going to govern the sustainability impact and of its overseas engagement, with a focus on Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. So I work with colleagues in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, as well as colleagues here in China, trying to understand how actually also people and interact with each other to build institutions, rules, and standards to govern sustainability impacts of China's investment, especially in the infrastructure sector, naming energy and transport sector. So I think at the moment we are at the early stage and trying to also map out what are the kind of ongoing initiative and trying to govern in this space. And also later on, we're going to conduct a lot of field research to engage with different stakeholders in these countries and trying to understand what are the kind of progress made in this space in terms of greening Chinese overseas investment, but at the same time also what are the challenges, and so how we can remove these barriers to ensure that China's capital and technologies can really benefit people and the environment in host countries.
Fascinating, and we are looking forward to use the map you're making. It would be really fascinating to see how this kind of interactive interface could inform us more about the role of China in global sustainability and governance. So Yifei, I know that you have this wonderful and really well-received book, China Goes Green, and in it you talk about coercive environmentalism. So could you explain a little bit? It's such a fascinating concept. I'd like to know a little bit about it. So what does it mean? And what is the work you are doing right now, especially in collaboration with Yixian? Have your kind of concept evolved in recent years, or have you kind of developed a new framework?
Wow, great questions. Thank you so much, Zhao. Coercive environmentalism, what it is, it's the use of coercive measures in the name of the environment. So, a good example, especially since we're in Shanghai, Shanghai's recycling mandate or the garbage sorting system is a case in point, in the sense that, they're compelling citizens in a city of this size to adopt a top-down system for sorting trash. In some extreme cases, we've seen the government installing facial recognition cameras to track people's behaviors. But across the board, we've seen the employment of what some people call garbage inspectors, right, at residential neighborhoods, where they would go through people's trash, especially at the beginning of the program, to make sure that people were sorting their trash appropriately. So there's a good amount of coercion that's built into the program, but it's justified in the name of the environment. So the broad sort of arc of my work, especially in that book, is to document how the use of coercive measures in these various environmental settings can have lots of unintended consequences. It could, obviously have privacy concerns, but also it enables the state to quite successfully penetrate in citizen life in areas that's well outside of the environment. So I think that's the larger scope of my work, is to document the sort of non-environmental consequences of supposedly environmental behaviors. So that's the first book, but in recent years I'm pivoting a little bit towards the people, more on the receiving end of this top-down model of environmental governance, where I, in collaboration with scholars both in and out of China, but primarily still focusing on China, is to document how, when the government tells people over and over again that these are the things that you should do, and these are the exact ways in which you should do them, does that actually make people more incentivized to do environmental things, or does that actually hold people back? Does that actually reduce people's political efficacy or their senses of political participation to such a point that they don't want to do anything? Or does it have the opposite, as sort of, a lot of the environmental propaganda seems to suggest, right? We mobilize the people, we get people excited so that they can come up and do all these things. So that's really the motivating question for more recent work that I do. With Yifei Li, who's at Michigan State, I've completed an ethnography of 3 Chinese cities where we actually observe lots and lots of people, especially in the post-COVID context. We ask them questions about how they're relating to the ecosystem, how they're using chemicals, for example, as a result of the COVID experience. And what does that really mean when it comes to thinking about our role in a very complex ecological system that is our planet? Right? So we're finding very interesting things in that area, something that I'm beginning to call lie-flat environmentalism. We're seeing a good amount of lying flat. But again, that hopefully gets to some more interesting aspects of Chinese environmentalism from the more bottom-up point of view.
Yeah, I've already learned a lot from this conversation, and I can see the differences between a sociologist and also an international relation, governmentality studies scholars' perspectives. So what is a project that you are working on together, the book or the article? I'm curious how you combine your expertise together in the same area.
Sure, I'd be happy to share something that we've been working on together. I think, we are doing a couple of projects together. I think probably the most important one is the book projects we call Green Soft Power and China's Rising Leadership in Global Environmental Governance. So this is a book I'm editing with a few colleagues, and Yifei is a contributor of our book, and we are also contribute a case study. So basically the book is trying to understand in this kind of ongoing environmental, ecological and climate crisis, how different actors use environmental actions to influence others. Basically, we draw on the concept of soft power, and we look at the issue areas of the environment, and then we call it green soft power, but also trying to contextualize into the Anthropocene into this crisis, the planetary crisis, using the case of China, trying to document how different Chinese actors, not just state actors, projecting this kind of green soft power. So how they're trying to exercise how China's activities on green soft power or kind of have been received or have been reacted by actors across different countries. And then, of course, I think at the same time, because we have seen this kind of changing role or evolving role of China in global environmental governance, I think kind of sub-argument we are making is China is emerging as a leader in global environmental governance. Doesn't mean like China is doing things perfectly, but I think given that we are actually now a leadership gap in global environmental governance with the second administration of Trump, and I think so many anti-climate, anti-environmental policies already announced. So I think we are trying to make the argument that China needs to make more contributions, and China has been already show some kind of aspirations and has taken some actions. So I think we are trying to showcase that this is a direction that maybe in the future China is moving to, and of course we try to make recommendations to see how China can do better.
Right,
That's
absolutely.
great.
And as part of the project, Xiaojia, you were asking about our collaboration. So as part of that project, I'm contributing with an NYU Abu Dhabi colleague, Sofia Kalantzakos, a case study of some of those undertakings in Abu Dhabi, right? They're in the UAE. So looking not only at how China is expanding overseas in terms of providing funding, providing technologies, providing solution packages, as they call them, or Chinese state-owned companies or even private companies going overseas, but really looking at the demand side, looking at their partnership with UAE companies, UAE authorities, and to try and understand exactly what motivates the UAE to begin to work with China more closely on a number of those issues, and also examining, when the UAE pursues these collaborations, what types of infrastructure, what types of energy concerns are there that's unique to the UAE circumstances. So I think a lot of it has to do with an approach to actually begin to examine China's overseas footprint, not only from a Chinese point of view, which seems to be the dominant narrative out there, but also looking at how there is a market for the sort of technologies and funds that China is providing.
And also, I think we have already moved into the BRI kind of global governance part. You've mentioned the UAE kind of Chinese maybe companies involved in some of the. Could you provide a specific example on what type of engagement, what type of companies are there contributing to their environmental or sustainability projects?
Yeah, a lot of the companies, Chinese companies that operate in the UAE, they're actually in the transportation sector. There's a good amount of that. In part because, the structure of the UAE is sort of a set of emirates that are loosely connected with each other, but there's sort of a perceived demand to increase connectivity across the emirates. And what there is right now is just massive roads, like 7-lane roads. Primarily connecting Dubai, to Abu Dhabi. And it's insane to be on that road, especially during rush hours, because it can take forever. So one of the things that they seem to prioritize in terms of infrastructural development is high-speed rail connections, not only between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but also connecting to the other Emirates in general. So this is a place where Chinese expertise, experience, and firms come in very handy.
So large infrastructural.
Exactly. Very significant infrastructural projects. And China has, frankly, a lot to show for when it comes to actual successes within this sector. So we're seeing a good amount of that. But in addition to these, there are also other smaller firms that are getting involved in transportation, for example, flying taxis. And again, the UAE being the UAE.
Real?
I mean, there are concrete investments. I can't promise that they necessarily would work, or driverless taxis. So there's a good amount of emerging transportation tools that are being featured, and the UAE seems to be the perfect environment for a lot of these undertakings because they have the funds and they have the space and they have the needs.
But also on the back end, the technologies, the digital technologies.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of, I think.
Yeah, there's a good amount of that. I mean, I was in Abu Dhabi during the COVID years, during the first bit of the COVID years, and the contact tracing systems that they were using in the UAE were exactly Chinese technologies. They didn't even fully translate some of the tools. So there would be, cases where you were scanning to make sure that you have the contact tracing QR code, and sometimes you would see Chinese in addition to Arabic and English. So, yeah.
And also, Yixian, I know that you've written about China's efforts to green the Belt and Road Initiative. So could you share a little bit more about the promising signs of the progress or the challenges that the Chinese projects have been facing in greening their infrastructures?
Yes, absolutely. So, this is something I've been doing for quite some time. I think basically I was fascinated as an environmental politics scholar when I was seeing the Chinese government announce that they're going to promote or build a green Belt and Road Initiative. Because when BRI was initially established in 2013, I was quite skeptical. I mean, I'm not sure if this is going to well received. Of course, we have seen a lot of criticism, and then we know that the infrastructure development in China has a lot of negative environmental consequences. Then I think already we have seen so many studies documenting the impacts. But very quickly, I think what we have seen is the government made this move towards greening the BRI. And I think it's interesting also to see how the narrative has been developed and also evolved over time. But also, I think not just the narrative, but also actions or initiatives or institutions built by different government agencies, but also sometimes non-state actors participating in the BRI. So basically, I think the progress we can see is quite obvious. It's not just that we have this kind of very high-level document. Of course, there are some studies, I think, criticizing that it's all about vision statement. But I think my study shows it's not just vision statement, because we have seen actual investment from different actors into this space, trying to build new institutions, new programs, really trying to do something. Of course, I think maybe the progress is not as fast as we may expect, but I think at least you can see building these institutions, making these efforts is a very important step. I think more fundamentally, the argument I'm making in several studies is that we have seen this kind of integration of the environmental norms into the BRI. So basically, environmental stewardship is already or has been accepted by the Chinese actors, not only top leaders, but also many other actors in their overseas activities. Obviously, I think this is just at a very kind of normative level, but I think if you want to see the practices, I think there are also a lot of space for improvement. So happy to share more.
That's great. And also with your mapping website, right, we will have more information.
Exactly. This is why we need, I want to do this project. Then, of course, I'm lucky to get the funding to do this and build a team. But also I realize if you really want to track the progress, then you need to do more on the ground.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe collaboration with sociologists.
There you go.
people with real stories like flying cars, transportation with 7 kind of lanes highway. So yeah, combining the stories, the on-the-ground information with the mapping, the aerial view of China's contribution to the Belt and Road Initiative, and also greening these projects. It's really a promising area in the future, I think. And then we briefly mentioned that the second Trump administration, it means that the role of the U.S. in leading, right, in the leadership of the global environmental governance has changed, and it creates this vacuum for maybe China as the second largest power, and also with all the infrastructural abilities and also experiences to maybe find a different role in it, a kind of a leadership in it. So I'd like to know, I know that Europe has also been playing a large role, so I'm curious about China's positioning in this new kind of geopolitical arena. Will China really be the leader, or is it right now competing with EU's role, EU's normative kind of structure, or is China trying to carve out a new kind of set of rules and a new set of territory for them to develop their own rules, normative structures, and everything?
I mean, that's a really hard question, in part because we recognize even from first Trump, it was very clear that the U.S. was retreating from, global governance in general, and most noticeably environmental governance. So that was just very clear. And second Trump, it just became, almost radically different from the United States before Trump. But the real question is whether China still has the ambition that China had under first Trump. I think under first Trump, a lot of the academics that I talked to and some of the officials, they seemed very confident that they felt that China most certainly is going to assume that leadership role. But I think with the economic downturn domestically, some of the challenges and pushbacks that it's facing, China increasingly adopts this new strategy of what they call small and beautiful projects, right? So they're actually scaling back a lot of the overseas investments, not necessarily to say that we don't want that leadership anymore, but not the kind of massive leadership, not that multi-billion-dollar leadership, but leadership perhaps through smaller demonstration projects that can illustrate an alternative future. So I think that's an interesting shift in overall strategy. There's clearly still the attempt to take up that vacuum as much as possible, but also there are real financial and economic constraints in addition to all of these pushbacks that China continues to face, even in places like Pakistan, which China considers to be its ally, right? Not to mention in Latin America, where the pushbacks along labor and environmental lines seem to be even more pronounced. So it's interesting to see, on the one hand, how China's ambitions are evolving, and then on the other hand, the local reactions to the arrival of China is also evolving in very substantive ways.
I'm happy to share some thoughts as a more like international relations or a political scientist scholar, maybe slightly different from Yifei, but I think Yifei was talking about more kind of China's role in providing developing finance, and then I think small but beautiful, small kind of, we can think about like smart leadership, right? So not always just giving money, massive money, but I think it's probably like the outcome of a reflection of the first decade of the BRI. I think a lot of projects was not kind of carefully designed, and then of course you got a lot of debt. Not only I think people like other countries owe to China, but also for these countries to I think have like huge debt to not able even to pay back. I think if you look at a lot of contracts, I think also a lot of contracts was very bad designed. So I think in that sense, I think China has reflected and learned from the lessons. But I think your question is more about this kind of global governance architecture. And then I think to me, I don't think it's a zero-sum game, right? So I think it's not like China competing with Europe or other countries. I think we really need more efforts, basically. I think we need a race. I think we need a race to the top. Everyone tries to do more. I mean, of course, China has some advantages. That's why I think a lot of people, especially people outside of China, has a very high expectation at China, so what China can do, and especially I think from top leaders. I think what we heard, especially I think President Xi Jinping announced just 2 days ago that China is going to continue, regardless of what happened in the world, China's climate action. So I think the determination is there, and also China is going to submit the new NDCs before COP30 in Belém this year. So we're going to see, and also I think it should be a quite ambitious NDCs covering all greenhouse gases and all sectors, but we are going to see like how ambitious it will be, because it will largely determine where the world will end up by 2030, 2035. But I think fundamentally it's about how China can serve as a model. So despite what Trump is doing, I think very much like the tariffs issue as well, but I think in the climate and environmental areas, we really need more actors, and countries still continue to collaborate, cooperate, and I think protect multilateralism. I think we know that otherwise I think we are not going to solve the problem. We need to join our effort together. So I think if China still continues trying to deliver the promises that has been made, I think that would serve a good examples. Of course, I think this is at a very high level, but I think thinking about all the challenges on the ground, that's I think that's something also one like taking actions. So I think thinking about the commitment and then taking actions, then I believe more efforts also needs to be made. So sometimes I think the Chinese leadership likes to promote the China model with Chinese characteristics. But when I talk to a lot of practitioners, I think they got this kind of task assigned to them from the central government to say, okay, you have to develop something unique or special as a China model, but I think they don't know yet. So they're trying to figure out what they can do. But I don't think necessarily like it can be some kind of China model, but maybe not an explicit model. So in my view, it's really to think about how is the best way, or how we can find a better way to leverage Chinese capital and technologies, and then for sustainability transition around the world. I think for that reason, I'm happy to announce that I'm organizing a conference on China and global sustainability transition. We call it China and Global Sustainability Transition, with different stakeholders in June in Bath, and Yifei will also participate in our conference as a representative of NYU Shanghai.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I would be so excited about what would come out of this conference.
Yeah.
And also I like what you said about cooperation and collaboration. These are still the tenet of the global environmental governance. And also I like the word you used, the race. It's not an arms race, right? So when we talk about environmental efforts, if there is a race between different parties, it could be it could have some good results out of it.
Yeah.
So my last question would be, so you've mentioned that you are working on this book and you have this mapping project, and then we hope your efforts could be delivered to some authorities in the future, right? So if you can give one suggestion to someone who's really overseeing all of these projects, what would be your advice to this authority?
Absolutely. Wow, that's a really hard hard question, because you have to distill everything down to, one sentence. I'll preface my one sentence with something that's more than one sentence, which is that, in Yixian and I, we're the same generation. I think, Xiaojiao, you are too. We're a generation where, when we grew up, the world seemed to be a place where people were building trust. People were trying to cooperate. And the general premise of the world coexisting is that we're getting better at doing these things. But the last couple of years sort of unsettled that entire assumption about where we're getting to. And I feel, if I can say something to presumably someone in a position of power, I would simply ask them to reflect on that change. I mean, when you're in the middle of that change, it could seem as though you can't see that larger picture, but if we just look back at the last, 10, 20 years, that change seemed so obvious. But if they're in a position of power, is there anything that they can do to bring us back to that world where trust building and cooperation was actually taken for granted?
Yeah, Yifei gave a perfect answer, very high level advice. I think maybe, yeah, I always think I'm very down to earth. So trying to maybe think about something very specific, also building on what we are doing. So I think we know, from the statement made by top leaders of China, is that China wants to become a responsible, like major power or great power. But how we can do that, I think our research, our work is showing that actually there have been a lot of efforts made. But at the same time also, I think we need to learn from the practices, from all the experiences, but I think there is no mechanism. I think what we are doing is trying to really kind of gathering evidence and then providing advice and then to think about if there's any mechanism for this kind of learning and also not just like learn among ourselves, but also engaging with different actors, engaging with our international partners. I think continue this learning, and that also relates to the trust. I think by learning and by engaging with each other, I think we can build trust.
Exactly.
So I think we want to show that there has been a lot of efforts, but I think also think about how you can build more synergies. I think not just duplicating efforts, but avoiding duplicating efforts, but at the same time trying to think about what's the best way to kind of coordinate with different actors, different efforts, and then together we can also have a learning platform. And I think academics like us, we can play an important role in that process.
Definitely.
So hopefully we'll have opportunity to make more contributions to that.
Thank you so much. And I hope this video could reach policymakers and stakeholders out there who could really learn from what you have just shared. Thank you so much for doing this with us, and have a lovely conference in Bath. I believe something great will come out of it.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. It's our
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.